Welcome everyone to another Frontline conversation with Leadership Greater Washington. We're thrilled to have Paul Wiedefeld, the head of WMATA, the Metro system, with us today. And I want to especially thank Jermaine Johnson, the head of PNC Bank, for the region, for their sponsorship of these conversations. And Jermaine, let me turn it over to you to say a few words and introduce Paul.
All right, thank you, Doug. So good morning, or excuse me, good afternoon, sorry. I'm the new regional president for Greater Washington. It's a role I've been in for a month now. I actually stepped into this role, assumed the role on August 1st from Richard Bynum, which I think many of you may know, especially through the Leader Greater Washington family. I've been in the industry for 25 years and have run our middle market and large corporate group for the last 7 years. I'm not a Leadership Greater Washington alumni, but I am a Leadership Fairfax 2011. But very happy to be here today to represent PNC and our sponsorship with Leadership Greater Washington and the Frontline conversations. This is actually the second conversation I've had the opportunity to do. So happy to be here with you this afternoon. I have the pleasure today of introducing you to Paul Wiedefeld. Paul has been in the industry for over 35 years, both in the public and private sector. He formerly served as CEO of the BWI airport and led that airport to becoming one of the leading airports in the region. He also served as CEO of the Maryland Transit Administration. And prior to all those activities in the private sector, he served for 10 years with Parsons Brickenhoff. Paul is a native of Baltimore, Maryland. He has a master's degree from Rutgers University in city and regional planning. He has an undergraduate degree from Towson University. And he now, as you know, he serves as the general manager and CEO of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, otherwise known as Metro. It was notable when I first met Paul, he may or may not remember this, but he and his wife were at a Board of Trade event. And it was notable for me that he was from Baltimore. I'm actually also from Baltimore. To me, it was pretty telling because you would need to have a tough guy from Baltimore to handle the challenges that he's dealt with at Metro. I want to thank Paul for all of his leadership and putting safety first, and for always thinking about the region and representing the region. You know, it's the region's view in recognizing, you know, Maryland, DC, and Virginia as an important part for making the Metro work. And Paul's always brought that to the forefront. So thank you for your leadership and making sure that the region was always recognized. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention very briefly here that the recent announcement that came from Metro with being able to use your iPhone or being able to use your Apple Watch now going forward to make payments. So not only has Paul dealt with the hard issues, but he's also brought some technology to Metro. So with that, I will turn it back over to Doug and get the conversation started. Thank you.
Jermaine, thank you very much. Hey, Paul, welcome. Great to see you.
Hi, Doug. How are you? And Jermaine, thank you for those comments. And yes, I do remember our conversation about Baltimore. So nice seeing you again.
So before I ask my first question, I want to pay you a compliment. I've been ever since I took the job with LGW in 2014, I've been a regular rider on Metro Patron. And when I started, it was not good. It was like people didn't care anymore. The riders didn't care, the staff didn't care, the workers didn't care. Things were just falling apart and stopped in the middle of nowhere for no reason, not knowing I have any idea what's going on. I got to say, since we hired you and the changes you've made, it's night and day. It's a dramatic improvement to the system. So I want to thank you very much for that. Thank you for making my life better, improving the quality of my life. And before we get into COVID and what's happening with it now, I just want to ask about you. How are you doing personally? How's your health? How are you taking time off to recharge yourself? And how's your top staff doing as well?
Sure. Doug, first and foremost, that's you just hit it. It's the staff that has moved the needle over the last few years. We've still got a lot of ways to go, but we focus on that every day. Really trying to get this thing better. So I appreciate that you recognize some of those changes from a customer's perspective. So thank you for that. I think I'm like everybody else, right? I'm wrestling with trying to find space in houses. I don't know if you all know, but we actually have a 2-alarm fire at our headquarters building in the middle of the COVID. So that building is uninhabitable right now. So we're bouncing around between different offices. But, you know, it's like everybody else, you know, we're dealing with some of the personal stress, some of the financial stress, you know, some of the health stress. But we got a job to do, and our team stays very focused on that. And I can tell you right now, our number one priority is the health of our employees. We figure if we do that, then the rest of this stuff becomes pretty easy. And that's what we've been focusing on really since we started actually in January 31st. We stood up our pandemic task force internally to start to think through what would happen just as we were following what was happening around the globe. So our staff has done a fantastic job, but we got a long way to go too, that's for sure.
So have you been able to take any vacation, any time off?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's
it's kind of, yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Actually, my son got married on February 29th in New Orleans. So we were all down there. And, you know, so we left there right, you know, first week of March, we stayed down for a week. And of course, the next week, you know, everything went up in smoke, right? And then, so my son, who just got married, ends up coming up to Baltimore. His wife is she's doing residency at University of Maryland Hospital in downtown Baltimore. And so they came and lived with us with their 2 dogs. And my daughter, who's in nursing school at Hopkins, she came to live with us, or came back to live with us. And my other daughter, who's in Loyola, New Orleans, she came and lived with us. So, you know, we've been bouncing around doing things with them, which is great. You know, I wouldn't give that up. But I also sort of miss being empty nesters too.
So you said you started planning at the end of January. What was that like, and how, when it all hit in March, how quickly or how easy was it to sort of implement things?
Yeah, well, actually, in the transit industry, I'm not sure what other properties have done, but we literally had a playbook where we had different phases that we would follow, and we have a fantastic team led by our chief safety officer, and basically we pulled that together, and that's sort of how it's been done. So we've had a series of people. There's an executive branch of that, and a much broader group where we get together on a regular basis. And at the beginning, it was, you know, literally almost hour to hour. And we walked through, again, we started with how are we going to keep our employees safe? And that's how we started to think about it. And yes, there's going to be service implications and financial implications, but from our perspective, the most important thing was to do that. And by and large, we've been, you know, very, very lucky, to be frank, very fortunate because of some of the homework that was done. Unfortunately, you may have seen 2 weeks ago now, we lost one of our employees to COVID. We've had over 200 of our employees that have had the disease or the virus. But you look in the transit industry, and this is important to understand, the transit industry in this country has lost hundreds of transit personnel. And they're the frontline people. A lot of them are the frontline people. I heard it happened not to be, it happened to be a manager. But it is very tough. So we tried to put in as much as we could to prevent that, keep that at a bare minimum. And I think we've been very successful at that. But we got to keep, you know, it's not over for sure. We got to keep our eye on the ball.
And it's not just, we talk about Metro, people tend to think of Metro Rail, but it's Metro Bus as well. And the bus drivers, that's a very different situation than the Metro Rail operators. So how did you work to keep them safe as they let people on and off the bus? And we saw instances in other cities where people were deliberately sort of attacking the drivers with coughs and other things to try to get them sick.
We did a few things. Very early, we went with, after the CARES Act, as that got implemented, we went with what we call an A-B schedule. Because, you know, think of the transit business. Normally, what happens is you have a lot of workers come in the morning peak, and basically they are around midday, and then they got to be there in the evening peak. So there's a lot of interaction of our employees. So we wanted to minimize that at our different bus divisions. So basically, we went with what we call an A-B schedule, where you worked an A day and you were off a B day, and we were trying to separate people as much as possible and keep them from congregating. When they got onto the bus, we went to the rear door boarding only, so you didn't have to pay the fare. But more importantly for us was so you didn't have that interaction right at the front of the bus. We do have shields. They don't totally encase the operator, but we do have shields that protect them. We gave them masks and those things. So we have done all those things. On the rail side, what we did there, because we don't have, particularly our rail operations center, which is like an FAA tower, you know, at an airport, you don't have a lot of resources there. You know, these are specialized trained people that take years to learn that. So literally we had to separate them where they would never interact. We had them physically going to 2 different locations, the main location and the backup location. And we kept them separated at all times, because if that side goes down, there's no backup. You know, bus operator, you have lots of other operators. In controlling the rail system, you don't. So we've done things like that along the way, and we continue to fine tune that. I also want to, you know, just, it's so important that in our industry that you work very closely with the unionized representative, you know, the unions that represent our employees. We have roughly 12,000 employees, roughly 10,000 are part of some union. We have 5 major unions. So we work very closely at the beginning again with our union leadership, so that we could deal with some of those union rules and whatever we might have to say, look, let's keep the focus on safety of the employee, and we'll work through those different contract related issues. And they've been very supportive of that. So that's really helped us. Some other properties have wrestled with that, to be frank. So we have, you know, we're in good standing there. So, and again, we're going to continue that sort of approach going forward, because as we all know, we're not quite sure when this all ends.
So how did you lead your team, the whole organization, through the beginning of this in terms of having them show up to work, giving them the confidence they needed that they could come to work? I mean, people just assume, well, that, you know, the train operators, the bus drivers, the grocery store clerks, the police, the firefighters, everybody's going to be there because that's what they do. But they're human, as all of us are, and I'm sure many of them were frightened about the possibility of catching the virus and becoming very ill from it. How did you?
I mean, I think, I mean, you know, we have a police force, and you know, they signed up for that. Our bus operators didn't sign up for a lot of what they're being exposed to right now, to be frank. Neither did our rail people. So one of the things that we did very early was to communicate with them. Again, work with the union leadership, but communicate directly with them. Show them what we're doing, what our plan is. You know, obviously this AB, you know, approach was very, you know, settling for them to say, okay, well, they really do have our interests at heart. You know, that has implications on service levels, that has implications financially, but they understood that, well, if they're doing that, they really are committed to us. We've done a number of things in terms of cleaning and sanitizing and stuff like in their workspace. So just that series of actions, I think, just reinforced to them that, again, we had their health and well-being at the forefront of everything we do, and that gave them some comfort level. But I also can tell you, you know, I've spoken to a lot of these, you know, these frontline workers in particular. You know, they're committed. They really are, even though they didn't sign up for this level of commitment, probably, right, where they're risking their lives to serve people. But they are committed. They understand the role they play, and they, you know, they want to do it. And so it's really neat to see that. Doug, I mean, you know, you've been around this region. When I first came here, I would speak to some of our employees that had been here 35, you know, 40 years. Literally, we had some people here. And this agency, people used to wear the uniforms to church. That's how proud they were to work for the agency. Well, that's still there. And we've tapped into that, I think, quite a bit. And I think that has come out during this pandemic, where they're proud of what they do. And they, you know, they are willing to take some risks because that's their commitment. So I think that's something we should all celebrate.
Well, I think what we've seen with the schools is we've got a lot of teachers and students and parents who are afraid to send their kids back to school, afraid to go back and teach in person. It's understandable. And I think the difference here is that you're working with the unions, your communication to your employees gave them the information they needed to say, okay, we're going to be as safe as we can be, and we're committed to the job, and it makes sense to come back. We're not seeing that in a lot of other areas. So congratulations to you on that. Let me shift now to the Smart Trip card and the mobile ability to now pay your fares. Talk about that. That's a great, I think you're the first one in the country to be able to do that. So congratulations to you on that.
Yeah, that's been quite a lift, to be frank. It's very, very difficult. We're such a unique system because it's one thing to do that where you just tap in and that's it, right? You pay and it opens and that's it. But remember, our system's calculating where you're getting off and at what time of day, right? The distance. And so that variable was really a big challenge for us and for Apple. So anyway, we worked literally for years with them. So there's a big technology component. There was also the understanding of all the different variables, the different ways that people pay for what we do with smart benefits, right? With the different programs we have, and trying to pull that all together. within, the context of what Apple does, right? And then so it took quite a bit. I can be very, very frank with you. About maybe 18 months ago, it was not going well, and I was ready to pull the plug. It's like, hey, it's an expensive endeavor. It will pay us in time, but the upfront money is pretty extensive, and literally I had to call in and have heart to hearts with some of the leadership of both Apple and with Cubic, which is our big fare company that supports our whole entire fare system. And they stood up, and literally we were meeting weekly to get this thing to where we needed to do. We brought in some really good people from some other areas that came in that joined the agency. So we worked very hard, and we're working. Just we're not done by any means in that. This is sort of the first step. Obviously, we want to work with Google and get that on Android. And there's other things that we can do to even further improve it. But I think we were really pushing for, particularly with the COVID. With the fear of that, if we can get, that's one less thing that people have to deal with. They don't have to deal with those large refrigerators where you go up and try to figure out, the different fares and all that. You don't have to do that anymore. You do it in the comfort of wherever you are, and it's done instantly. So that was a really big thing that we wanted to do, and we've been working on it for quite a while, and we really stress getting it done now as we start to try to ramp up service.
And how's the rollout been? We got one of our members, John Joaquin from class of 2015, who said he's shifted to that already. It's a seamless procedure.
So far, so good. There's been some hiccups, but relatively small for the type of scale we're doing. And to be frank, some of them is that people just didn't have enough money in their card, so it's not letting you get on until you put, you have to have some money in there, right? We're not doing it for free. But I mean, just the fact that you can take your card and put it up to your phone, and it, sort of takes that information, puts it on there, is just amazing. Just so that card is no longer any good for anybody. So you might want to frame it as a souvenir or something, because you can't give it to anybody. It doesn't do anything. It's dead.
So where are we going with that in the future? Are we be able to use that a ride-on and the dash system and all the other?
You can do that now. You can do that now. So we actually coordinated with all 13. Yeah. So right now it applies if you're taking a bus and any of the other 13, sort of regional partners that we have. We've been working behind the scenes with them for a long time on this. So that's doable right now. But I think just in the future, I mean, it's just like anything you're doing with your phone. If you think, 6 months ago or a year ago, how many things have evolved? So that's our same sort of philosophy right now. Where else can we take this? Particularly as you start to think about how could we connect to maybe other commercial enterprises, for instance? Are there things where we offer discounts? They offer discounts to us, somehow through this magic of, this phone. There's just so many, the avenues are really limitless. And I think, so for instance, one example we may want to do is work with the airports. So when a tourist arrives, a message comes in their phone that says, hey, you've just arrived in Washington, D.C. Here's our mobile app to join, the system, and here's how you do it. And you automatically just go, just swipe by this, this little target, and you're in. So there's lots of things that we can do that we're working on right now as well.
So let's talk about service for a bit. You took a huge hit, as everybody did, around the country when COVID hit, and you've increased your service, but people still aren't. I haven't ridden the metro since I left the office in March. We shut the office down, said we'll be gone for work from home for 2 weeks, then we'll come back and everything will be normal. And little did we know how stupid that was. But
right.
So where are you in terms of service and restoring it, and the federal government coming back, and
sure.
Any projections for revenues and things like that?
Right. There's a few things there it's probably interesting to understand. One is we've lost about 80% of our ridership, okay, total. And just on a normal, pre-COVID, we were roughly about 600,000 passengers a day on rail and about 400,000 on bus, so 1 million passengers a day, okay? So we're 80% below that, where we were. But what's interesting is from a so that's ridership. But the real key for us is the financial aspect. So on the financial aspect, obviously we're not collecting any revenue on the bus right now because we're protecting the front of the operators. So that's hurting us. But even when we do collect, 80% of our revenues come from rail. And that's because we charge, based on the distance of your trip, and we charge a higher premium during peak, whereas bus, it's flat. So just when you take the 60-40 split of more rail riders and then the nature of the fare structure, 80% of revenue comes from rail. So, but rail is down almost 90%, and it's been flat almost for 6 months. You know, there's little bumps, little bits, but basically it's flat. And what we've learned, we've done both surveys and focus groups, and we worked with Greater Washington Partnership in creating this employee survey to find out what people are thinking and what employers are thinking. And what we're finding is, A lot of employers aren't doing anything maybe till after the new year, is one thing. The other is that people, particularly rail riders, are not coming back until there's a vaccine. Now that may change, you know, but you ask them now, that's their mindset. So, you know, who knows? No one knows with this, but that is a very real concern of ours because it's such a large portion and it's the keystone to our financial model. So if we don't have those rail riders, particularly peak rail riders, then that's where we're going to be hurting. And it's an extreme challenge because a lot of those people that take us during peak periods have the financial ability, have telecommuting, have the technology, they have the work environment that they don't have to use transit. And then if they do have to commute or go to the office, they often have a car. So they have that option. So that is the concern that we have going forward. We've been very fortunate with the federal funding that we've gotten. It's carrying us probably to the end of the year. Literally, we're burning through that money. And at some point, obviously, that tipping point, we passed that tipping point. So the discussion right now at the federal level to get this CARES Act 2.0 that I'm sure people, you know, followed, you know, that's critical for us because if those dollars don't come, you know, we can only turn two places. We turn to the local and state governments to please give us more money. And there, as you can see, Maryland just came out Monday with their financial plan, which they literally cut billions of dollars from their transportation program. Same way with local governments, they're all under stress. So that's most likely not a source for us. The other source, the only other avenue we have to go to is to cut. We are basically an 80% labor intensive organization, you know, mechanics, operators, that's what we do. And so we've done a lot on the management side to reduce costs. There's just nothing there. We've been doing that for the last few years, as you may know. We in effect have eliminated 800 positions on the management side over the last few years since we've been there. So there's not much there in that cupboard. And it really only turns to the service side. So we've got to avoid that at all costs. We've got to make the case that we, federal level, to get the dollars. We have to think intelligently about the types of service. What is the right sizing of what we put out there to try to save money, to be efficient? But at the end of the day, you know, unless we get additional funding or ridership comes back, you know, quicker that we all hope that it comes back, but I'm not sure it's going to. That's the challenge that we're facing going forward. And you'll be hearing more about this. We're meeting with the board in the first week of September 10th, next Thursday, where they've asked me to come up with some a scenario of what does the remainder of our current budget look like. We're currently almost 3 months into our initial budget, you know, for 21, started in July. And some of the assumptions that we were making in spring are quite different than what we're seeing in reality. You know, what we've seen over the last July and, you know, into August with what's happened across the nation with, you know, the resurgence of COVID, with where we thought maybe schools would be opening, you know, in September, you know, DC and different things like that. That's not happening. Just the different hotspots in the region still remain. I know, I think there's 13 zip codes in Prince George's County, for instance, that are well above the 5%, you know, threshold that we're all looking for. So there's a lot going on that's going to impact the system going forward.
So how confident are you that you're going to get that federal money? I mean, clearly, it's essential across the country. New York,
yeah,
there's billions of dollars in the hole. I'm sure.
Right.
Well, it's very frustrating that they can't seem to get it together. Now the president has said he wants to cut federal funding to New York and Portland and DC and whatever. It's just
yeah. So I'll steer clear of all that, but
just
you know, at the end of the day, you know, what this eventually means is jobs, right? That's what this means. Whether it's the jobs of people that are in this business, or I mean, you know, in my aviation background, I'm following that. Aviation's in the exact same boat we are. You know, they're projecting 30 and 40,000 layoffs and things like that into the future, and not in the near future. I mean, we're talking October, November timeframe, because the same issue. They've been, you know, propped up a little bit because of this financial national, you know, international crisis that only the federal government can to be frank, can deal with, because the local governments, their funding structure doesn't support that. They can't print money, right? So that's the challenge. So at the end of the day, it's really an economic problem that's faced. It's not a transit problem, an aviation problem, because all that just feeds the economies that we live in. Whether it's in New York, where they're providing the transit, the transportation backbone to their region, which is what we do here, or aviation, you name it, right? We're all in that same boat. So unless there's some action in that area, unfortunately, we're going to be spiraling the economy, I feel, further down. So that's why I think it's just so important to move forward with that. This is not something that is an ongoing ask, right? This hopefully is always, for all of us, a once in a lifetime ask, but it is a needed ask. And we're at war, and at wartime you have to do certain things that you would never do in peacetime.
Yeah, we're all hoping it's not just a once in a lifetime ask, but once in 100-year ask. If this never comes back or doesn't come back for quite some time, we're able to move on. What are the kinds of things, Kathy Guy asked, what are the kinds of things you're looking at in terms of marketing, communicating to the public, to the riders, that it's safe to come back, and how are you encouraging them to understand what you're doing?
Yeah, in fact, we're going to roll out our program in September. We were sort of waiting until things settled a little bit through summer. Generally this region tends to get a little bit more focused after the holiday. So that's when we'll start to roll that out the next week and for the rest of September and October. And basically, it's going to focus on what we've heard from our customers is they don't want to know it's clean. They want to see it cleaned, right? So historically, what we do is we clean, but we clean at night. Well, they don't want that. They physically want to see us doing it, which is great. We'll do that. That presents other issues for us, in terms of safety and things of that sort. So we're going to show them what we're doing there. We're going to project how these things are being maintained and cleaned, and how safe it is, and how to use this safely, and how this is a commitment from all of us, to do what's right, whether it's wearing masks, whether it's keeping distance from people, all those things that we all want to do. To be frank, the mobile payment was part of that initiative. The timing of that was a little bit earlier because of our partner in Apple. They drove when that was going to be announced, which is fine. But that was all part of the whole package that we were coming out with. Is all right, start thinking about us. We will show you how we're trying to keep you safe, but you also have a role in this. And I think you're going to be seeing that some from APTA, which is our industry group. You'll be seeing that next week as well, where they have a commitment, a joint commitment from transit agencies and the customers, because I think this is a two-way street, right? We need people to do what's right and do the things they're supposed to do. Like, we don't want to get into a big enforcement issue on masks. Everyone should wear a mask. They have to wear a mask. We don't want to be chasing people around that. We have masks for people if they don't have them. So it's things like that we're going to be pushing out. But again, it was really focused after Monday, just given how things generally work in this region.
So as more and more people start to use the system, and the trains and buses get more crowded, how do you elevate sort of the level of protection to deal with the extra people?
Right. So what we'll do is, on the rail side, we're not as concerned because the demand isn't that high. And yes, it will come up, but the scale, there's quite a bit of space. Let's see what happens. But our numbers are showing there isn't this big push, that you normally feel. So that isn't there. And our customers are, spreading out themselves. One of the things we've learned, for instance, is, you see to keep the 6-foot distances at, markings at grocery stores and stuff. We've learned in the transit side that really doesn't work very well, just given the nature of how you board trains and things like that. It just doesn't work. And our customers said, look, that's fine and good, but that's not how we're going to behave. On the bus side, it's a little bit more where we can do some things. So what we've created, as we've eliminated what I call those AB days I described earlier, where we brought the entire workforce back, and given that the demand is, it's variable across the region. So what we're going to do, we have what we call an extra board, where we have operators on standby. So what we're going to do is monitor those lines at what times of day, where do they need more service, and then apply those services there. Some of them may be literally almost live, what we call either gap trains or gap buses, where we have things positioned, and as things build up, we run things in there and clear it out. If you've ever go to a Nats game, that's what we do every Nats game. That's how we empty it out. You know, we don't just keep running the normal schedule. We have gap trains and they're prepared, they're positioned. So we are going to do that same sort of philosophy, particularly on the bus. We'll do it on the rail side if there's events. So for instance, last week we were prepared to do that with the march. There's other times where we've already prepared to do things like that on the rail side. But to be frank, it hasn't been as much of an issue as it has been on the bus. So our focus is primarily on the bus right now.
So let's talk about the Greater Washington Partnership, and they've got a huge rail committee that's looking at sort of integrating the transit systems from Richmond to Baltimore. And Beverly Hudnut had a question of, do we as a region, do we have the bandwidth to enable you to be creative in terms of timing of things, in terms of working with the other regional transit systems, to be creative, to be innovative, to do the things we're going to need to do to respond to this after COVID?
Yeah, I think I don't think we have to wait till after COVID. You know, I'm a firm believer that yeah, this is a very tough time that we're in right now, but we can't be limited in our thinking and thinking about the future at the same time. You know, we can do both at the same time. So for instance, you know, we have some major capital investments that we're doing that, you know, we're not going to get the benefit for years, but now is the time to do them. And we need to prepare, particularly so we don't repeat some of the mistakes in the past where we were always trying to catch up and or, you know, not even dealing with things. We're just sort of ignoring them, but we're not doing that now. So I think it is our responsibility not to get so laser focused on the here and now, but also to think much larger about things like that. So whether it's connections, better connections with the commuter rail system that connects, you know, the Virginia and Maryland into the district, for instance, whether it's MARC or VRE, whether there's other technologies out there. I mean, you know, there's been talk of different high-speed rail options in that corridor. All those things we should be part of and thinking about with, you know, those people that want to do that and those entities that want to do that. So we're not just focusing on the day-to-day that we do, which is important, but you know, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I was really pleased to see the partnership come up with this approach, and they've done some good things in workforce development, and housing, and other things. But I think this is going to be very, very helpful for us as we move forward. And are you all, how much of that future thinking are you doing? Again, focused on the here and now, but quite a bit. Probably not more, you know, not you know, externally, to be frank. I mean, we're working with groups like that, but we are doing quite a bit in terms of, again, thinking about what does the future look like for us. Let me just, if I could, just as an aside, and I think this is important as we think through COVID. As was mentioned, that Jermaine mentioned, I was the CEO at BW Airport for a number of years. I started there shortly after 9/11. I started there in March. It was the first week that we started the TSA checkpoint. We were the TSA checkpoint in the country, if you recall, at that time. This is March of 2002. And at that time in the aviation industry, it was called the perfect storm. You had terrorism, you had SARS, and you had the price of a barrel of Jet A was about $120, $130 a barrel. So it was they called it at the time the perfect storm for basically pulling down that industry. And all the news articles, everybody, you know, the industry groups were all wrestling with that. Within a year, we had struck a deal with Southwest Airlines to build a 26-gate terminal and basically make make BWI the hub for the northeast of the United States. Their day begins at BWI and starts going to the west. So I think it's important that, you know, we obviously work what we're dealing with here, but we also have to think that, you know, this does not go on forever, that the importance of transit remains, and we have to think longer term. So whether it's with Greater Washington Partnership, whether it's making sure that we think about land use decisions that way, we think about some of the things that we're doing in terms of the big capital investments that we're doing, whether it's some of the stations, whether it's new 8,000 vehicles, right, that we want to line up now because that demand is coming, because that's what the economic engines of this region need to support that. So we have to think that way as we deal with, you know, the here and now that we're dealing with. And we got a question from Corey Cusack about what thoughts have been given to how we can use this time to set up WMATA to come back stronger than ever, as opposed to we've been struggling for finances and all that.
Sure. There's a few things on that front. One is on the capital side. We have been doing that. So we have been doing quite a bit of capital investment during this period. You saw it play out on the Silver Line where we did some things there where they basically got us way ahead. And that was less painful because of the very low volumes of people that we're serving. So we're going to continue to do that. There's some other added benefits there, just in contracting, some of the bids we're getting, things of that sort. So it's an opportunity from that perspective that we want to explore and, to position ourselves in the future. In terms of the importance of transit to the region, and I think, that's be one of my asks of your group later. We have to keep beating that drum because it is real. And, right now there's some not talk, but, out there's people say, well, do we ever need transit again? Does it, do people, they just change their travel patterns forever and we never do this again? Well, I just don't think that's realistic. And we're gonna need a lot of leaders to stand up and say, wait a minute, time out. This is the quality of life that we want. We've chosen to live in this region for these reasons, and we need to support this as a major, institution that supports that. So anyway, I think that's something that we all will have to do going forward. So I think probably sooner or later we have to start to beat that drum a little bit louder.
Well, I agree with you on that, Paul. I just think that the economic development, the vitality of the region really has resulted in large part because of Metro and the connections at the Metro stations and the ability to grow around those stations as well. People now say, well, even the CDC said, well, when you go back to work, drive, don't take transit. Well, it doesn't help.
I know. Well,
we're going to get through it, and then we need Metro to keep running as it has been, keep running well.
Yeah. And I'm sure the CDC also is concerned about the quality of the air that we all breathe too. So they got to be careful.
Yeah, it kills me because the head of CDC is a graduate at St. John's High School where I went. So in DC. Okay.
Call him up.
Anyway. Talk about any leadership lessons that you've learned over the past few months. You earlier on, the beginning of the conversation, you talked about communication, how important that was, communicating with employees. Now we've recently been talking about communicating with the public about what's being done and how they can come back and all that. So, anything else that you learned over the last few months?
Yeah, I think some positives, some negatives, to be frank. I think on a positive side, and this is nothing new to anyone that's been through your program or anyone that has a leadership role, you're only as good as your team, right? So, and we have a fantastic team, and you've got to let those horses run, right? And do what they do. And probably even more so in this type of environment where you're not interacting 4 and 5 times a day in person, bumping into them in the hall or whatever. So you need that confidence and you need their ability. So that is, one of the big ones is, just making sure that you have the team, you're giving them the support and let them do what they do. And let them be the leaders that they are, right? And it doesn't all fall on one shoulder by any means, and nor should it. One of the negatives that I've seen though with this from a leadership perspective is the spontaneity and the creativity that occurs in person that I sort of miss. And it may just be my personality, but that interaction, that personal interaction, I just find so much difficult. When you have a number of people that you're trying to foster that type of discussion around an issue or around a thought or around, some creative thing that you want to do. How do you do that with 7 or 8 people where you almost have to take turns talking over each other? It's one thing when you're doing it physically, but you read the body language, you can really understand what they're saying, or you can understand when they're not getting what you're saying. All those things play out in my mind when you're in person. So from a leadership, to really get leaders and to get leaders to constantly think about what's next, which is one of the things that we've always stressed, since we've been here, which is, look, it's not about what we do every day. That's, that is our job. It's really thinking strategically. That's the challenge. How do we constantly force ourselves to think strategically? And I find that much more difficult, through this 2-dimensional way of communication. Now, maybe over time that evolves, I don't know. And it may be just that, the way that I think, but I felt that across the board. I think it's put stress on leadership teams where you don't have that interaction, where some of the things that you might say, in this type of form is different than when you say it in person, how that person reacts, where you read them and then you start to adjust, some of that's missing, or I find it missing. And I think so that's a challenge for us as leaders. How do we still maintain that creativity, that spontaneity that you need for an organization to grow when you're doing it, through these snippets of meetings and time and stuff. So that's one of the things that I'm wrestling with still.
Have you seen that change over the last few months? I mean, I could see at the beginning the shock of working from home, of not being with each other, could stifle a lot of things because of the stress you're under, the tension, just trying to deal with it. But I would hope over time we get used to it and people will be able to do it.
To a degree. But I've also found that the downtime, that needed recharge time is much harder to come by. And, because, I mean, I'm sure, many of the people that are watching this, these things are never off, right? You're constantly interacting with this. So true downtime, whereas, when you're interacting with, I find when you're interacting and you come in and you do it, but then there's this sort of lull, whereas what I'm finding is that lull is never really, really there. Even though you may take time off, you're really not. And believe me, we're a 24/7 operation. We're always engaged, but it's different. It feels different to me, and the reaction and the interaction I see between some of our managers is, I think, based on some of that stress and some of that lack of that physical interaction that they're missing. And again, I think over time, maybe that, gets smaller and smaller, but right now I still see it.
So are you making them take time off, take many vacations?
I begged some of them to take time off, to be frank, but even when they do, because of this technology, you're always on. So literally, I literally said to some people, no, you have to, I don't want to see you on one of these screens. But their nature is to do that, and particularly in the environment that we're all working under. If this was standard stuff that we're dealing with, but it literally changes by the day, by the hour sometimes. So it's hard. It's really hard. But I've had several members of my staff that have not been able to get home for months. Part of it's because of the work environment. Part of it's because where they're from is in quarantine. Where we are, all these different rules they've got to play, or that we all have to live by. And literally they have not been able to take that physical break and visit family in different parts of the country, for instance. So that's tough. That's tougher. And I'm not, I'm sure everyone of us that's on this call has experienced that. And that is really tough for people.
Well, I would just recommend that strongly, just from personal experience. Last week, finally, I took a few days off and I shut off Zoom for 3 days, and it was unbelievable. I mean, I really decompressed and just recharge and everything.
It's so important.
Because you're operations 24/7 when you're here,
Yeah, and operations, it's changing minute by minute. So people, they tend to stay, even when they're off, they stay engaged just because of the nature of what we do.
Well, that was when I stopped being an elected official. All of a sudden, I realized what weekends were all about. If you actually take 2 days off and not do anything. I had, for 25 years, I never had a weekend. So
right.
Not for me.
Well, yeah. You know what it's like. Yeah. But as you know, Doug, that's also what drives some of the, the level of people that we have.
Yes.
This is who they are. This is, they want to be in the arena. That's what they do. And so that's tremendous value, for an agency or public service in general. A lot of, as a lot of the public service people that we've known, like Neil Peterson, for instance, who's now TRB, people like that are just wired a certain way that's who they are. And, we're very, very fortunate to have people like that in public service.
I was always struck by the professionalism and the dedication of the public servants that I always worked with. They were there to make people's lives better, to make their communities better. And they really believed that. That's what drove them. It wasn't the salary. It wasn't publicity. It was just, we're going to make this a better community. It's really inspiring to work with them and watch them as they grow. So that's a piece of good news for all of us. What can LGW do to help you? You mentioned earlier about trying to put out the word of the need for transit. Clearly, we're going to be doing that. Because
Well, the immediate ask is, and again, we're very fortunate with our delegation here, but we have to, get the federal government to sort of step up to the plate. So anything you can do in that arena, I know that, Greater Washington Partnership, a lot of groups that are working that issue, but we cannot, we not take the eye off the ball there. We also, just as you recall, we have this special funding source from the federal government called PRIA, and it's 150 million per year that's matched locally, and that's what's helped us bring back the system. Well, that's always in play. Right now, it's in the president's budget. It's in the House budget. It's not in the Senate budget. We need those dollars, and then we need a long-term commitment of that too, which is down the road a little bit, not very much further when they do a major reauthorization of the transportation bill. But so that's another one that, again, I think I know you're familiar with that issue, and it's one that we constantly ask the business community to keep that in front focus, because we can't lose that money, the $300 million a year. Right now, we have this immediate challenge of the Federal CARES Act running out. And then I think this longer term ask, or it's an ask now to deal with sort of this longer term view of transit and the importance of this system to the region, the economy of this region, the people of this region, the environmental quality of this region. We can't lose sight of those as people think, well, maybe we can save some money by not doing this because look, people they're teleworking, at this level. That changes, I think that will change.
I think people need to realize it's not just the CARES Act that's in jeopardy and the new funding that you need, but by the end of the month, if they don't do something, the federal government shuts down. So we have a shutdown and all that, which would be a dramatic problem for the entire country, but particularly for this region. So, Paul, we appreciate that. We'll take those into account and see what we can do to help you on that. I want to thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
All of your leadership. Thank you for making Metro a really important part of our region and something we count on if we're going to grow. And let me just thank you for your time and give you the final words.
Yeah, just thank you, obviously, Doug, and for obviously what you've done for the region, in your career here and what you're doing now. And Jermaine, thank you for sponsoring this. But I think I would just leave you with one thought, which is, transit in a major metropolitan, a world-class city like we live in, it's by choice. People choose to live here because they want that interaction, right? I mean, people choose to live in Paris with all of its issues, or San Francisco or New York or Washington, because they want that interaction. And we have to keep in mind that that is what we support. We're not because of it, but we support it. That's what's so attractive to this region is people want to interact. They want to experience the cultural things we have, some of the environmental, things we have, the quality of life, whatever it is, the entertainment, all those things they want to experience. And transit in a dense urban area is what makes that happen. It's the glue that sort of holds that together. So we can't lose sight of that. I'm very positive about that because I firmly believe that is how people want to live, that choose to live in those arenas or in those areas, and that will come back. So we've got to be ready for it, and we've got to celebrate it, right, and what it does, and not be shy about that this is our future. And we're supporting it and we want to do it and we can't wait to get back there. So I'll just leave it at that. So thank you, Doug, so much for the time.
Paul, thank you very much. Thank you to Jermaine Johnson of PNC Bank for sponsoring this. And we've got another one next week with Juan Nesbitt, the Chief Health Officer for DC, to talk about what's happening with COVID in the district. So Paul, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
All right, be safe. Thank you so much.
You too. Happy day, everybody.
Okay, see you.